I'd like for you to imagine a time when you're immersed in a conversation in an upcoming family dinner. And someone says, hey, you're at this conference. Tell me, what is this future of making thing? What would you say? In one sentence, what would you say? And then someone else at the table, it could be your mom or it could be your cousins or aunts or uncles, say, what does this mean? What's the impact of this future of making things thing? Well, you might say it's all about automation, how emerging tools are changing how we do things. Or you might talk about how industries are coming together and converging. Or you might talk about some emerging technologies. Or you might talk about a vast range of different types of tools and classes of emerging processes that are going to change the way in which we design and make things. And when you got on a roll, you'd realize, wow, this is really complicated. So we produced a book some years ago that explores the impact of design, and we thought it was time for us to do another book that explores the future of making things. So what I'd like to talk about today is making the future of making things. And it's a book that we put together over the course of 18 months that really had three goals: to inspire, to explain, and to provoke the people who read it into thinking about what's different, what's the implication of these crazy classes of emerging technologies. So what I'd like to share with you today is the practice of thinking through and making a book. And as you'll see, in some ways, it's kind of like manufacturing an object. And in other ways, it's like making a movie. And it goes through a number of processes. And of course, it begins with the world of ideas. So where would you start? You would start, I think, by asking people a lot of questions. So we began by asking people within our company, I think over 70 people, about what the future of making means for them and what are the technologies, what should we show, what are the big concepts, what is the future and how should we portray it? And as you'll see, it's kind of all over the place. So we took those 70 conversations and then we mapped them through a number of dimensions, beginning through with breakthrough versus current. And as you see, it's kind of scattered. Or should we tell stories about people doing amazing things, or about the impact of technologies and the power of the technology to transform how we make things? And the view was across the spectrum. Or should we talk about only Autodesk technology and how we're a part of this overall future, or about what other organizations are doing? And again, it's like this. So some people might say, well, this is a kind of a lack of alignment. We're kind of all over the place. But others, like me, think this is an opportunity to bring together the great diversity of the future of making and kind of synthesize it into a simple, clear narrative. We then spoke outside of the company to designers and makers and thought leaders and a number of institutions around the world, and we quickly realized that words, well, are not enough to make sense of this. So we then converted these words into sketches. So we quite literally sketched every conversation. And those sketches took the form of digital slides, and they kind of covered the essential ideas of each of the people that we interviewed. We then took those sketches and created a giant storyboard, not just once, but probably about 40 times, between 30 and 45 times, in different places around the world, and used that as a way to have conversations about what's changing. You know, what do we do more of? What do we do less of? What customer should we put here? What's the pacing of the ideas? How do we portray the future of making in an arc that someone can get in a few minutes or also during a very long read? So this became a tool for us to be able to look at the big picture and also at the details in close view. As I said, we then had and recorded conversations of thought leaders who were saying, you know, what I see is important is here. So it's a powerful tool to be able to organize and make sense of things. We realized fairly early on that there are kind of a key theme. If there's one theme that brings together the future of making, it's the connection between the digital world and the physical world, of course, are uniting. There's a kind of dance. You know this, of course. The way in which we express this is through different classes of technology, those that can capture and compute in the digital world and then create and compose back in the physical world. And it's the interchange between those different worlds that is the force of the driving force. We also, believe me, this is so unusual, but it took us 6 months to figure out what's the core idea, and it boiled down to this. Emerging technologies are transforming how we make things, who makes things, and the nature of what you make. I think that's what I would say at the dinner table. So we had many, many customers. Even just here at Autodesk University, there are dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of stories that we could tell. But in creating a book and really engaging at the dinner table, you'd really want to focus on what is a story. So what is a story? And my definition is a story is a combination of people that are going through some kind of trouble, and they have a journey that resolves the trouble. And one of my favorite stories is one of not just this company, but of this person here, Alison Felix. She's an Olympic-class athlete. She's one of the fastest women in the world. And she had a problem that she reached out to Nike to figure out how to solve. And the problem was not running down the 200-meter, which she was the world-class athlete, but it was around the curves. Why is that a problem? Well, the reason it's a problem is that when an Olympic-class athlete runs, the body wants to move straight, but as you move around the curve, there's new forces that impinge upon her body. And those created injuries, and those created real challenges for her. She was actually out of commission for quite some time. So could there be some type of technology, some future of making, a running shoe, an Olympic-class running shoe, that would address the problem? And how would that work? Well, Nike's approach was to begin with digitally capturing the properties of her foot, the shape, the morphology, the inner structure. They printed out various models. They digitized virtually every aspect of her athletic performance. They even measured what's called the stiffness profile of her foot. Those are the curves on the left-hand side. And essentially, they correspond to the impact of the force as she runs. So they then allowed a computer to generatively design the right kind of sole that would augment and reinforce her natural gait. And so those were printed out. Interestingly enough, the computational design discovered that one foot acted as an accelerator and the other foot acted as a steering wheel. So the computer actually generated two different kinds of shoe bases that would augment and reinforce what she actually did precisely with her feet. They then composed and created and composed this next generation of material. And that, by the way, is the first 3D printed running shoe base that has been used in any professional competition. So the result is this: 2 gold medals and 1 silver medal. So no one would actually claim it was the shoes that generated this, but it certainly gave her more confidence and augmented. The real story is not just this. The real story is how this technology is becoming democratized, and by the way, we'll be able to use generative design and other tools to capture, compute, create, and compose shoes in the whole market, shifting the shoe creation process from 18 or 16 months down to 2 days. That's pretty interesting. So that's one example of about 40 stories that we have in our book. Now, to tell the story, we feel that we need to have clear, vivid, inviting, meaningful pictures to really give you a sense or a feel of what this actually looks like. And so selecting the pictures is kind of an art and a science. So for Procter & Gamble, in a story describing how virtual hands can manipulate virtual bottles, discovering whether an 80-year-old can open a bottle or whether a 5-year-old can open a poisonous bottle. They generated tens of thousands of different types of hands because you can't physically test and prototype when you sell products to 1 billion people every day. So we chose, which one would you choose? Chose the one on the right, because that was more immersive and more visual. And then the story of Hugh Hare, who used sensor and capture technology to robotically replace his legs, which he lost in an accident. I prefer the one on the right, but it was unfortunately the one on the left that we could use because Wired had used the one on the right. Or what about holding a 3D printed nozzle? Is it the whole engine, or is it the nozzle? And we picked this one here. So we felt it was a good way to be able to tell the core stories. Now, in the process of building the prototype and engaging dozens and hundreds of people in the process, we made, I think, an amazing and unique discovery. And I'm really proud to announce that discovery here. And that is that people don't have a lot of time to read. They don't read books. And so we needed to figure out a way to design the book in a way that people got the idea. So we designed it in such a way that you could flip through it, browse through it, or deeply immerse yourself in different time frames. So literally you can flip through in 60 seconds, you can go through it in 10 minutes, or you can spend an afternoon or day, or even a couple of weeks with it. Another discovery that we made is that, in fact, it is true that people do judge a book by its cover, especially if the cover is all about the future of making something. So we were looking for a book that would have a book cover that would have these properties. And so we began with esoteric visualizations, and we produced cover designs that looked like this that didn't really work. And then we looked at other imagery that we thought would invite people, but people go, I don't really know what it meant. And then we discovered, of course, what we really need to do is to show the future of making by 3D printing using additive manufacturing for the book. So this is the beginning elements. We tried some generatively designed letters, and then we printed out many of them at no small cost, and then we rearranged them and photographed them in high resolution, and then the response was, meh. And then we put a different background on, and people went, meh. And then we discovered that one of our creative directors, Keith Chamberlain, was working on some next generation of imagery, and so we incorporated that imagery within the final book cover. And so we liked the way it wove and kind of suggested the future of making in a kind of an organic way together. People are in kind of two categories. They either look at a book cover or they look and then they touch a book cover. And so we decided to make it dimensional so that it became embodied what we were trying to express, the future of making things. So the result of this is a book that is 330 pages long, and it really illustrates, we think, the core idea that emerging technologies are changing how we make things, who makes things, and the very nature of what we make. And the how is about 4 classes of technology: how digital captured tools are transforming the behaviors of objects into a stream of digital data. And so we tell stories about how organizations from around the world are doing just that, instrumenting the objects that they make. And then how computation takes that digital information and then creates digital simulations, models, analysis, and you can apply now, of course, machine learning to be able to enhance and create better outcomes. And so there's a vast range in different industries that illustrate how that works. And then once you have that digital model, you can then bring it back to the physical world with robotics and virtual reality in some cases and other tools to be able to produce the next generation of things. Again, one of my other favorite stories is of this one on the lower right, is of a building that houses robots that builds buildings. A little meta there. And then the combination of these are then of capture, compute, create are reinforced with the next generation of material sciences illustrated by Compose. All of these are combined together and are becoming democratized that are enabling new people, new communities to be able to design and make things. Not just existing and traditional supply chains, but people literally working from around the world in many different countries. What are these communities making? They're making things that themselves are connected and in connected ways. We're changing what we make, the very nature of what we make. And the transformation is that we're no longer making things that are inert or dead, but instead making things that continue to evolve and grow out into the world. That, of course, leads us to new choices and a manifesto. So that is our view of the future of making things. And the good news is here at Autodesk University, everyone in this room here will get a free copy of the book. And so at the end of the presentation, after Darren's presentation, we would love for you to take a copy. And at your next family gathering, if someone asks you, what is this future of making thing, you will be able to just give them the book and get back to your meal. Thanks for that.